Most memorable concert and how were you dressed?
Phew, how much time do you have? Good questions, definitely. So I'm like, oh wow, I had not thought of that.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to Rough Cut Diaries, please.
My name is Professor Jorge Leal, a historian and assistant professor of history at UC Riverside and co-curator of A Great Day in East LA, Celebrando the Eastside Sound, the exhibit.
Dr. Jorge Leal, can you please tell us about this amazing place we're in?
Well, currently we are at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes here in downtown LA, properly right in front of the birthplace of Los Angeles, which is Olvera Street. And particularly, we're inside the galleries of A Great Day in East LA, which is a survey exhibit of the history and the sound of the East Side Sound of Los Angeles. And I happen to be the co-curator of this exhibit.
Take us back a day in your young years and how music lived in your home.
Well, I grew up in Guadalajara, Mexico, and my childhood wasn't a nice, good childhood in terms of it was a city that was growing, and so we would see that happening. So there was a lot of energy in terms of the city growing, and you seeing that as a child, that was quite interesting. And in terms of music, that is interesting. I mean, music was around my home, but in a kind of more just ever present. Not necessarily that my parents play music or had a special fondness of music, but rather that music was an everyday part of life. We had a record player. Our parents allowed us to pick records and play the records. So music was part of our everyday lives. And also my mom. My mom listened to the radio all the time. And when she was either cleaning or, taking care of us, or we were driving somewhere, the radio was the radio was always on. So the music was an everyday part of my life.
Share with us a couple of playlists that mom will play for you guys, whether at home or in the car.
Yeah, so my mom would play a lot of the, even though I came of age in the 80s, it was a lot of the 1970s Latin American crooners, Rafael, Jose Jose, Camilo Sexto, but also the woman, like of the 80s, Judy, uh, and then the earlier stuff, Victor Infante, mm, Lucha Villa, and so it was the kind of like pop of the era, but also the Mexican music, and of course Pedro Infante, and Jose Javier Solis, Jorge Negrete. They were always in my mom's playlist.
Dr. Leal, I can only imagine all the instruments you play because you're a fanatic of music. Can you share how many instruments you play?
I play exactly zero instruments. So yes, my music interest does not come from performing or playing instruments. I don't even think I can play the little triangle thing, like but for me, music is very important as a music fan because it allows me to feel, to think, to share. That's the beauty. The beauty of music is that it allows you to enter in whichever capacity you you want, you can. And for me, as before being a writer, before being an academic, I'm a music fan. I'm a music fan. I enjoy music, and or I enjoy music in many different ways. When I say enjoy, I experience it. Sometimes it makes me cry. Sometimes it makes me really happy. Also, I'm not a great dancer, but it makes me dance. But it tells me something. It shares a lot. I mean, music shares a lot. From the very primal emotion, like it makes me move my body, it makes me feel things, right? On that, like at the kind of like feelings level. But then there's so much more about music. It tells me about history, like not only in the lyrics, but also in the sound. Um, and then music opens these worlds that allows you to learn about other people, about other communities, about people that you have no idea that they exist when you're young, right? And you're like, I'm listening to this record from Cabo Verde. Where is Cabo Verde? And then you end up going on this rabbit hole and learning about the history of a country, right? And then, or and then learning about like their history. Like music is such an intergenerational art form that is built on earlier generations, and then you learn about that. So for me, that's a beauty of music. Like one at the personal, like it moves me, makes me feel things, makes me express, it's allowed me to express things as I listen to it and then I share it with others. But also it gives me like this entrance into learning about other people, other in the past, but also other countries, other regions. So that's what music allows me to do. So I come in as a music fan first.
In any part of your life during that time, did you feel that it was shaping you to a future where you were involved as a historian?
Actually, it didn't. I never really thought of music being anything particular, anything that needed to be extraordinary. I actually thought about it as being very everyday, but I was very interested in what I can think of talking to calling them music worlds. Um, so for me, music was this confluence of sound, words, and other things that you can really explain. But that was the good mystery, right? Of how music gets made and also how we receive it as people. Um, but I never really thought that there was. I never played an instrument. I never really had family members that were really that dedicated to the music making rather in the music consuming or enjoying music. So for me, I think that's what has been different, right? I think a lot of people that are into music as the study or the interpretation or part of the music business are because their family members were musicians, themselves were musicians, and that's not my case. For me, I think that the way I think of music is understanding as an integral part of the human experience.
Creating communities. One of the things that I read in your bio was that journalism came first
Hmm.
before your PhD in the classrooms. And you're already a storyteller.
I think that my transition from being a journalist to a historian and to think of music has always been there. But I consider myself first and foremost a writer of the human experience. And music's a different facet from that, but I mean, it also relates. I mean, like narrates, um, and narrates the human experience in many different ways. So for me, growing up, and coming of age here in Los Angeles as we migrated from Mexico to Los Angeles, um, as an immigrant, it was being in Los Angeles. It was just this world that was fascinating, but also really unknown to me. I mean, I had on my mom's side, my family has been in California since the 1920s, so it's a 100-year-old presence of my family in the United States and in California. But yet, I this is a very fascinating, complex city. So the way I got to know it was as a journalist to try to write about it. There are so many different music scenes, music worlds, and the music that is being heard throughout Los Angeles and Southern California. That it also helps you learn about different communities and different cities. And so there's many aspects of that, right? And one for me as a young person going to shows that allowed me the possibility of going to different neighborhoods to and go to a show, a tocada, a gig, be it in a venue or be it in a backyard gig. And as I was getting to that place with my friends, or it was trying to understand different communities in Southern California. So, for example, if we went to a show at Tocada in Southgate, and getting to Southgate, which I didn't have any reason to be except going to a show, made me ask all these questions. What is this neighborhood like? Why is it people live here? How did it change over time? So music allowed me, along with writing, the possibility of learning more about Southern California, Los Angeles, and then as I was trying to just understand the city, right, as an immigrant, every time I wanted to understand a neighborhood, I felt the need to understand its history. And so that's how I eventually transition from journalist because I trying to write about the present of Southern California. You need to understand its past. So I that's how I went back um, to school to try to and to do this to try to understand its past to become a historian.
It sounds like the archives was alive back then. You just didn't know you were building one yet.
Yeah. So thinking of how we all humans create a record of our past. That is an archive, right? So um, the archive for me, the archive is a more expansive way of thinking about the archive. The archive. Sometimes we think of the archive as documents and photos and all that. It's there, but as an immigrant myself, and I always think about that. You know how being an immigrant really mm, oriented me. I wanted records of us, our presence here, right? Our presence in this place, in this city, and going to music shows. You would get these flyers, these pieces of paper about this show that will happen, and then the show would happen. And so for me, I understood it as like that. That's a piece of history, right? Not only I did not understand the flyer just as a way of sharing, something that an event that happened, but that eventually that would become uh, a record of this thing happened, right? Or this event happened. And I started just keeping them, collecting them, without really thinking. At the time, I didn't understand myself as a historian, but I thought somebody's going to make use of this material later on. Little did I know it was going to be me later as a historian. And that preservation of these records, right, of these things, I think of that how intentionally as people we want to collect our stuff, our because these are records of our life and how we record what we did in our life, what did we participated on. And years later, be it 5, 10, 15 years later, your archive, which is, it could be receipts, it could be photos, flyers that I collect, music in terms of record and perform, record in different mediums, cassettes, CDs, records, right? Not only narrate your personal history that you can reflect back, I was part of that, I was listening to this, but it also allows for us to have record of a collective history that we can then place in a larger historical context of this is what's happening in the 1980s, 1990s. This is the music that we were listening to. This is the places that we were going to. And on that, like that kind of archive captures more than just official records. I mean, like on official records, maybe you see where people live, what they did, but it doesn't capture the full human experience. What did they listen to? What were they worried about? But also what were their, reasons for joy, their hopes. So collecting archives of cultural expressions allows us to see the full humanity of people.
It feels like language itself became part of a story you were chasing. How did that shape you?
Language is really important, both in English and Español. I think that language allows having like learning, thinking, expressing oneself in different languages allows for a multiplicity of identities, but also a multiplicity of ways of being, multiplicity of ways of understanding oneself. And so in this moment, I'm doing this interview or like this, I'm having, um, engaging in this conversation in English, but also I'm thinking in Spanish. So there's, like this multiplicity of thoughts that can only be like further expanded by different by thinking in different languages. So, and I think that language also, there's so much on terms of either in English or Español. I mean, like it allows you to understand life in much more in-depth ways. And in particular to the music that I gravitated and I write about, which is rock en español, but also just music from Latin America or from Latin America and Spain. There's not only is just language of transmitting something, but it is there are different feelings, there are different ways of being. There's just a and it's there are different life and ways of looking at life, both in English and Spanish, and then even just in Spanish, right? Like the variant Spanish of every country, be it Mexico, be it El Salvador, be it Colombia, be it Chile, or Spain. Like all these different variants bring a different way of thinking about it, and ultimately just a different outlook. And so for me, language has always been a big part of how we learn the world, not only as me as a historian examine it, but also how we use language to express ourselves.
Speaking of expressing ourselves, you've curated museums, you've handled flyers, tapes, photos, things people usually throw away.
Yes, the archive that I use and I think about, it's stuff that people in academia we can call it ephemeral, like meaning that it's not meant to last, right? Or discarded stuff. I mean, the flyers that I look at, I mean, they were made out of cheap paper and photocopy. They weren't yet. They were not meant to be preserved necessarily, or they were not created with that intention. Yet I think that I don't think that people really thought that they were ephemeral or they were to be discarded all the time. I I do feel that like that's if we think about life. I mean, sometimes we think of big moments, big documents, like or very preserved documents, but most of our life it's the everyday. It's the everyday, like living day to day, and that allows us to get to the human experience in a more finite form, but like in a detailed and nuanced form. So at the risk of sounding super philosophical, right? Like when we think of life, we might think of big moments in life, graduations, weddings, big trips, and that's all important, right? That's but most of our lives are kind of those everyday moments, right? Like going to the market, going to work, commuting, and those are the moments where we are, in our most pure form, right? Our human form. And so back to the archive, I think it's really important to capture like those, preserve and capture and examine those like examples of everyday life, ephemeral, like things that are discarded, but that are really important to give a sense of, like like how we built our lives.
It's interesting. You mentioned how it moves you. Can you define what's going on right now, and what genre of music would you put in right now, and what's going on in the world?
So we're living through an era, a very difficult era, right? Of the where after decades of perhaps the expanding of rights, we now have a retrenchment or like a taking in the most simplest form, like our rights as humans are being constrained, are being taken away, and it is infuriating, but at the same time, I mean, not infuriating, and this is something that as humans, and societies have experienced in the past. For me, right now, the music is both thinking of like previous histories, but also it allows me to activate. It allows me to one feel angry, right? So I mean, in that I listen to a lot of punk rock, a lot of music that is socially committed. That yes, it makes me mad again too, as I'm listening to like. So yeah, I'm thinking of Los Crudos. I'm thinking of Rage Against the Machine. I'm thinking of Malta Vecindad. I'm thinking of Nego Gorriak, Nego Gorriak from País Vasco, Todos Tus Muertos from Argentina. So I listen to that like gets me, on one, like it's fast paced. It shows the intensity of the moment, but it has a a socially conscious message that it allows me to feel like, yeah, I'm not alone in this. I'm not, like people in the past have fought for, like injustices, and it allows you to, one, verbalize pushback against injustices, but at the same time, also a hopeful message. And so it's not only like the like heartbeat, aggressive music, but then I also listen to Nueva Canción from Chile. In Chile, they experience an overthrow of a democratic government, and there were decades where people had to fight for bringing back democracy. So that's more acoustic music, but that it has a hopeful message in even more despairing circumstances. So that is again the beauty of music, that it has the human creation has composed, has created so many music genres for basically every human feel and also societal situation. And music ultimately creates a language that sometimes we don't have to express how we feel and what kind of situation is going in the world.
You've taught a lot in many places, from USC, Cal State Northridge, and now in the University, California, Riverside. When you walk into a room full of students, what do you tell them about music and how they're pretty much writing their history and how they should preserve it?
So I've been very fortunate to teach at different places here different institutions throughout Southern California, from public universities to private universities, and also what we call Research One universities, like such as the University of California at Riverside, which is where I teach. And for me, the first thing I teach, they're the things that I want students to get out of my class, and the teaching I do is to impress upon them something that I think we all should already think about, that we're all historians. We're all historians, because if you are wondering what the history of how you came about in this world, you're already a historian. You're seeking out to understand the past, right? And that they already have those skills. Like, we already have our historian skills as humans, because the class will be just to fine tune those skills. And one way to do that is to understand the music. That music is it's one part of how we can learn history, but how people were narrating history in the past. For example, in the Mexican American community, corridos were a way of talking about something happening, right? In essence, creating like the first draft of history in that 3-minute song, and how 3 minutes it's in a corrido gives you the history of a particular event, and that also what I tell students is that we're all creating history. We're all being our historical actors. Unfortunately, not in the conditions of our choosing. I mean, we're all part of this, and we're all creating history. That history is not created just by powerful people or like exceptional people, because that's not the case. History, we all create history collectively, and that by listening and examining music allows to see that how everyday people have narrated, chronicle, documented history, be it on a piece of paper, on a writing, on writings, on their lyrics. And a lot of we listen to famous corridos, but also we read and hear corridos that were not famous, right? Thus, signaling how important it is to look at this, right? And the last thing I like for students to know is that history takes place. Sometimes we think that history just happens somewhere in the past, but no, history takes place. I mean, and so their neighborhood, their place of worship, their schools, like wherever they go and that place has a history. And when they go and take and learn a little bit about it, Like they'll see how, they're part of this historical process. Like they'll be historical agents, in the near future. So, and I see that, when students come back to me and said, I had never thought about why my school is called so and so, and now I know, right? And that that they see how they're able to identify the history of a place, the history of of music, and how when I talk about corridos, for example, after back they come and they're like, I never knew that corridos were actually telling us histories, and there are not always pleasant histories, right? But they're histories of all loss, but they're like, now I see that this is a historical this is a historical chronicle, and then they see how they can do that themselves, like by taking photos of their family, talking to their families, um, and or also ultimately preserving their own flyers, their own photos, their own records.
With that in mind, how do you teach youth culture while still evolving?
That is a really good question. I mean, how do we teach youth culture, right, as it's happening now? This I go back to being a journalist, and journalist, it says that, like it's often said that journalism is the first draft of history, and so when youth culture is happening, be it now through videos, right, on social media, scenes, people, young people are doing scenes, fancy underground scenes, things that are physical, right, or not, or virtual, or digital. Uh, what we're doing is looking at, sometimes creating, but also preserving what is the first draft of history. So we might not be able to do the analysis happening right now because things are happening, but what we can do is the preservation, and then just kind of like think about, like, this is how people feel at this moment, this is what they're thinking about, this is what they're verbalizing at this moment, and then then within later on we have the luxury of time to be able to say, oh, this was an era, or this was kind of a flash in the pan. But yeah, youth culture is very dynamic, and as we know, what happens now, i- and what things are hip and trendy now, in 6 months could be passé. Like they could be like, oh, news, right? But at least I think it's important to understand it in the moment, and then later on come back and reflect on it.
Do you feel or believe that we're talking about new generation, new music, and creating history? Where does AI music fall in all of this?
Well, I mean, AI, it's a moment where we want to think about that, and we want to think about how we hear the thread that is going to replace a lot of the ways, a lot of things that we do as humans. And I still don't see it. What I see is that it's a tool, and it's a tool, and it can do things, but ultimately the human creativity, it's way more unboundless than AI. AI can only know what it knows because of what we feed, and the other stuff it makes up, but it's not human. And what we have in terms, I mean, like, and so I think that it could be used as a tool, but the human creativity, um, it's what has always expanded the notion of what is possible. And I, I still don't think that a software can do that. And even if it can, I think that we humans gravitate towards seeing our own limits as human being pushed in terms of creativity. I think that, and we see that in, obviously in my realm, music, but in a lot of things in history, people think, oh, that's not going to be possible. Because people have tried it and it didn't happen, or it's just not going to be possible. And time again, for good or bad, we see that humans push that and make things that were impossible seem possible. I mean, or make them possible. I mean, if we go all the way back to flying, yes. I mean, for thousands of years, humans wanted to fly. It didn't happen. Now we fly every day we want to, right? And in terms of creativity, for hundreds of years, people sang music, but it was condensed to whoever listened to you live. And now we have so many different ways of not only creating music that then is shared around the world, but preserving it in many. And so that is something that we also thought that it wasn't going to happen, and now we have. So I think that for me, AI, the way other technologies are, help the human being ultimately do what it does, which is expand the limits of human creativity.
You've written a book, but you didn't stop writing books. You made a podcast too. That felt a little bit intentional. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, well, I'm finishing up my book. I have written plenty of academic articles, but yes, for me, I think of myself as a public historian. So, what is a public historian? Someone that shares the history, share history, right? With hopefully multiple audiences. So, for me, creating a podcast, it is a way of us going beyond what we think in society what a historian is. So I don't know. Sometimes people think, oh, a historian is this person that is on a desk writing and then history, or like just looking at past things, right? And then on that, like then he goes to a classroom and delivers a lecture about that, and that knowledge is shared, but within those four walls. But I think of history, and this comes not only from academia, but our own experiences as Latinos, Latinas, Latines, in how a lot of our history, it's not in history books, because in the US, we're not taught as being part of the US sometimes, or like that our history, it's not part of academia. It is, it should be. Uh, but how we as Latinos have learned our history a lot of times has been through oral tradition, through family members, community members telling us this is what happened in the past, this is the history. And the history has been shared verbally, orally. That is also, you're thinking of the corridos or songs, right? Like that's how history is shared in the absence of a book. And so as a podcast, for creating a podcast for me was a bit of that continuation of the oral tradition of sharing history, but in a technology that we now use a lot, right? Like the podcasting that we listen to these episodes on our way to work, the gym, um, but with the intention of sharing the history with multiple audiences. That so it's not my job as a historian. I feel that it should. I mean, part of it is to write about the history and share in a classroom, but also be able to share it with as many people as possible in different medias, and that means also being able to adapt it to the medium. So for me, that allows me to share, what I think about in terms of history, and share the history that I write about with other audiences.
I'm going to switch a little bit on rock en español. In the 80s, 90s, it was very influential. Why do you think rock en español still carries a political weight?
Well, rock en español comes at a moment, right? A moment in Latin America where there's still censorship, there's still repression, and rock en español becomes the place where people could talk freely about things, to push against censorship, to push against the lack of liberty in or democracy in different countries, and also rock comes it's youth derived, so that young people listen to it, and it's a moment of rebellion, right? So sometimes music is kind of just rebellion for being rebellious sake, but other times it has a social and political committed message that people didn't see on TV or in other records. And so that is why rock en español at that moment becomes so important, because it's the way people can still, talk about the realities without varnishing. We're like, no, it's perfect. No, it's not perfect, right? It's, there's all these things that are making us unhappy. So there's that rebellion. There's also that denunciation of injustices or things that are not going well. That this is also a moment of monoculture. Monoculture in terms of like there was only one single culture with TV channels or radio, and it was what the government establishment they favor, and the other music was not played, right? So it came as a kind of what we call counterculture. Um, but it did not do it in it did not do it in too serious of ways or too kind of sermon like. It was fun, it was rebellious, it was enjoyable, and so that's different, right? I mean, when you read political manifesto, and if it's just sometimes it might just leave you despondent, right, and angry, but in music, it also gave you, some fun to be able to listen to it, to activate you, to make you feel something. And so that's why I think that rock en español had that. It had many of those components of like, yes, it's telling you something, but it's also allowing you to bounce around, to jump. It gave you an outlet, but it also gave you substance in the lyrics.
Now you're writing more than Ruido. The title alone says a lot.
Thank you. Yes.
How did that come about?
So it's this now decade long, which I never thought I was gonna be a whole decade of writing about something, right? Long investigation or examination of this music world. Because I sometimes when we hear music is scene, it feels like it's small or like provincial. But for me, Rock Angelino, it's a music world. It is a music world of many different people, and so I was part of it. I was part of this scene, right? As a fan, I would see a lot of these bands, like that were based in Los Angeles, try out their music, like getting together bands, having their first songs. But then it was an explosive moment. I mean, the music captured the imagination and the of many people. Like it's and that was a really interesting moment to see it, because there's other moments where music has been around, but there was like just a selective few people, and this for me, I mean, yes, not only that I got to see it and experience it, but it felt very different from other moments, but it had also commonalities, parallels. So for me, it was really important to see it, but then now in the history, in a retrospect, because we now have almost 30 years of of distance, right? I'm able to understand it more because of the historical distance, but then also place it on a socioeconomic historical context. That is like, oh, this was happening. Like we were all these immigrants migrating to Southern California in the 1990s. And why is it that we migrated? So I start thinking about that, right? And why is it that at that moment in the 90s, when immigrants and second or third generation US born Latinos have always had animosity between them, why is it that at this moment actually that animosity went away and it became a place of solidarity, of knowing each other? And well, we were being attacked by different anti-immigrant policies, but that allows to create some solidarity between us, and that's not, it doesn't happen naturally. Like there's an intention that has to happen, and all that happened in the context or in the backdrop or in the front of like people listening to music, that if you were just listening to it, you would say it's a bunch of noise, a bunch of ruido, right? But when once you start just taking not only taking a look at it, taking a more careful listen, you see that this is not longer ruido, but it's a very coherent music world that is telling us a lot of things, that articulated a lot of things, and it created a community that now it's an intergenerational community of people that still know each other, they marry each other, they're still friends, and they not only created, like personally, but then they created a legacy of music and sound.
After everything you've done, journalism, music, museums, classrooms, what we all want to know is what still excites you.
Wow, what still excites me? For me, there's two things that excite me still. One, the power of knowledge, and like, yes, I think of music, but the power of knowledge to become intergenerational, to that still teaches us something, and that, for example, now my students are super young in comparison to me that I'm, close to 50. And that they're 18, 17, 20, and they're making like understanding the world, and that this music teaches them something, that it gets them excited, but not only just kind of like as a historical artifact, but rather that they grew up listening to this music, and for them it's a music of their family and their it's and I didn't think that was going to be the case. I never really thought of, like that. I didn't think about it in the past, that this music we were still going to be listening to it, that the now children, I'm sure that almost grandchildren are still listening to. That gets me excited, and gets me excited to understand how people think about this music in different ways. Like, so it's not the same meaning that I gather from that I did from me. So one example is Tren al Sur by Los Prisioneros. For us growing up, it was just like, yeah, that's a cool jam or bop, as the kids say. And for older generations, it has become an immigrant anthem. And so for me, I never really thought about it that way. But now, like, it's how music continues to be transformed. That's one thing that keeps me excited. But the other part that makes me really excited is how the the struggles that we had as community, as people, are big and real and formidable, but that a lot of us have developed a vocation of service, and so that is no longer this kind of individualistic thing, like, yeah, I got my thing, or I got my success. For me, as a professor, curator, and like back then as a music producer of live events, what really showed me is that the power of community, of that we can open doors for others, like, the way other people open doors for us, we can do that. And that for me is exciting, that like I get to work with others, mentor others, the way people in the past did for me, right? So that's, I think, that gets me excited to know that I'm part of now this legacy of people, that like people did this in the past, and I can now see it. There were few professors in the past that helped me to where I am, and now I get to be in that position, to be the professor, the mentor that helps students, like along their personal, professional, academic journeys. And I think that you see that in a music world, like when it creates a community, people sustain each other, help each other, towards getting more people to do to be not only successful but accomplished in their lives, and that they realize that. So that for me is exciting, to see the success of others, that other students, friends, like, are able to accomplish their goals. That's exciting for me.
It almost sounds like you're not done yet.
No, I don't feel that I'm done. And I think that if we bring it back to music, music is never really a song is never completed rather than abandoned, right? Or like it has to be wrapped up, right? But no, I think that there's a lot to be done and said.
Kind of curious, indigenous people back in the days, how far does your studying go as far as music?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm not a musicologist, right? So I don't do that kind of early music. Um, but I do know that there's, like, musical traditions by indigenous cultures. They and they use them both in ceremonial ways, but also in, like, everyday ways, right? Like um, I mean, there's more recorded on, like, kind of the ceremony, the big events, right? But we know that um, different indigenous nations, they had music, and it was an ever part presence, music and lyrics, right? So in the he was a poet in the in the Mesoamerican tradition, Nezahualcóyotl. So he used poetry, but that poetry was also accompanied by music, right? So and yes, there's the colonization, but a lot of the musical tradition that comes from Mexico and Latin America, Peru, for instance, has it has contributions of indigenous cultures, right? Be it the flute, or like even the drumming tradition from Afro descendants. So there's a lot of things that we don't even think about how they come from different contexts and backgrounds.
One of the things that I actually enjoy about work is that music is not just for one age group. It belongs to everyone. And parents in different generations listen to music differently. What have you experienced in all your studies that you've done?
Yes, I think that's the part that gets me excited lately. Or like thinking the intergenerational, the ways that music is experienced in different generations, and in different contexts, right? So, for example, there's I mean, there's the memes of people like, oh, música para limpiar, like the clean music, right? And but it puts you in a mood, and it puts you in a kind of productive mood, and it's like, let's clean and let's get this done, right? Um, there's obviously music for somber occasions, but then there's the music for that celebrate that you listen to it and you don't know that that music had been around forever, right? But then it becomes the link between you, your parents, your grandparents. So in my case, for example, Pedro Infante, it's intergenerational. I listened to it when I was a kid, and I didn't know that he had been dead for decades. And in my mom's side, people listen to Pedro Infante, and so that, and then even Pedro Infante, his songs, some of the songs that he recorded were even older. So that creates that connection, right? That through music you can connect to your family. But then people listen to it in different ways. Like the meanings might be different in the different contexts, right? So also how we listen to music at different moments, right? Be it we're in our context, maybe we're commuting, and that's kind of like everyday music. But then it helps us move through the city, and then other music has like helps you feel motivated, inspired, and so that could be like a ranchera, or it could be some salsa, or cumbia. It not only gets you hyped up, right? So I feel that that's what's really interesting about how music not only captures different moods, but also then allows you to connect to family history. And then people remember, like, this is the music, this is the song that my mom used to play at these moments. And like a lot of the times, they might be sad, right? Like thinking of Rocío Durcal and Amor Eterno, which is then also you see it's a song for an elegy but then you learn that it was composed by Juan Gabriel. So you see the interaction between a Spanish singer and a Mexican artist and composer. So
So it almost seems like curiosity feels like the one thing that doesn't age.
definitely, yeah, curiosity. I mean, it's something that drives you, and that you can see like you can see in different historical moments and different generations, and that curiosity keeps for me, the curiosity keeps me going in terms of my work, my teaching, mentoring. I, um, that is something that I have always wanted to learn more about the world, and music has allowed me to do so.
So, with that same curiosity, what should people listen to if they want to understand the past? In order to understand how the music was written at that time, per se, the Beatles in the '60s, Elton John, Molly Crew.
Yes.
So in the '80s, there's certain lyrics that now you be like, oh, that's what they meant. That connection,
Yes.
right? But it took us, what, 20 years to understand that's what they meant about when that, and I was just singing it. I didn't even know what it meant at that time.
Wow, that is a really good question. I mean, honestly, it's a really good question. And every place, every country, every music genre has that, right? So I can think of, in the context of this recent exhibit that where we are, is to understand the music of the Eastside Sound, we have to go all the way back to Lalo Guerrero. He's a Mexican American from Arizona. Um, and because he was very like he wasn't seen as an American, like wasn't allowed to be like the record industry in the U.S. didn't know what to do with him, he had to go to Mexico to record. And so even though he was born and raised in the U.S., he was singing in Spanish. And a lot of his songs are very politically or socially charged. I mean, he has one, No Chicanos on TV. He talks about the Sutsu riots of the 1940s, so that's one thing. And then in the 80s, we have La Bamba, that, like I came of age watching the movie, but it's about Richie Valens, who was born as Ricardo Valenzuela in the San Fernando Valley in the 1950s, and he dies at 17, but he was becoming an up-and-coming rock and roll star. So that's another way of, but like in the 50s, he decides to record a song in Spanish, La Bamba. Why, right? So those are just among the two different things that we can think about. And in terms of rock en español, I mean, the rock Argentino from the 70s, they talk in metaphors or like in these stories, but they're also talking about, what they're really talking about is the dictatorship. So, but they cannot really say, this military are coming after our people, but they're going to disappear. What they, like Charlie Garcia has this song that talks about the dinosaurs and how the dinosaurs are they're around, but they're going to disappear one day. And if you don't have any context, you're just like, oh, this guy's weird. He's talking about dinosaurs, but it's a metaphor for the military.
In your own opinion, what sounds do you hope survives the longest?
Oof. I would like every song to survive the longest, right? But I think that what we see with music coming from Latin America, I hope that the ones that continue to survive are the ones that are surviving, such as cumbia. Cumbia has gone through so many different iterations. And cumbia is like this very important blend of Afro-derived music with indigenous American music, and then just kind of like the contemporary wittiness of Latinos, right? So like all this double entendre, the doble sentido, the kind of like sexualization of things, but the fun, the kind of irreverent fun of it. Then it makes you dance. But then, like there's so many different kind of cumbia variants, right? From the traditional to like even space age cumbia, trap cumbia. So I think that I see cumbia as one that I think it would continue to exist. But in each time, people add something to it. I mean, there's a lot of rock en español cumbia, for example, El Gran Silencio. And so I think that I would see that, like I think that ultimately what sounds do I want? I mean, the ones that come and that show a part of, like the kind of like Latino culture that always, like, it refreshes it. It's kind of this evergreen.
What would the world be without music?
It would be a sadder place. It would be a place that would have a lot of silence, and also I think that it will be a world that is people communicate less, and ultimately I think that not only it's just the joy. I mean, like there'll be less joy, but also less opportunity to also express kind of the palette of feelings, because music also makes us feel sad, makes us feel reflective. So it would make us less humans.
Music crosses borders faster than people. A song you don't speak, but you feel. Why does music help strangers connect?
So for me, that's one part that I have always been very fascinated, which is music does transcend borders, moves borders, and then a lot of times, music is able to go where people can, for one reason or the other, right? Like, but it's able to reach. So there are people that live in the U.S. that cannot travel back home, but the music can. And that's a way of them being connected to their countries of origin, to their people, when physically they might not be able to do so. And for me, that's an important function of music, to continue to connect people to their homelands or to places where they were, if they're not able to travel back. Also music, on that, if we get kind of philosophical, music allows us to go back to the past. um, to uh, to be able to listen to a song and say, like it allows you to set yourself back at least for those 3-4 minutes to like an earlier time at a place, right? And so that for me it's the magic of music, right? To be able to transcend and to transcend time and space. Music allows you to go places too that you have never been and you didn't even know about them, but through music you're able to listen to Fela Kuti from Nigeria and be able to say to at least be there, during the duration of the song. It creates a space, creates a feeling, it creates a place that you can visit. Without, like and invites you to places that you didn't even know existed. Since music transcends borders in the sense that the music can move when humans sometimes it can, right? Music connects people that were strangers, and like into dance partners, into bringing people together that might not talk to each other at the beginning, right? But they're there to listen to us to a live band. They're there to dance, and it's music gives you that invitation and also the prodding to interact with strangers, and that is also quite powerful. Quite powerful. I mean, and I say that as an introvert. I was an introvert, and I'm still very introverted. So I didn't really introduce myself to people when I was younger. I mean, when I was, I just kind of kept to myself. I was very shy. But going to shows, going to a tocada, a gig, one, it pushed me. Like, I like this music so much that I am willing to go by myself to a show next to other people. And because I know that we have one thing in common, which is we like this same genre of music, or we like the band that it's about to play, that I know I have a commonality with them. And that allow me to, break out of my, shy shell and to talk to people. Oh, so you like this band? And I think that experience for many people that, like it allows you to connect to strangers because you have a shared affinity, a shared like for one music, one song, one band, one music genre, and then develops, can develop a friendship. And of course, people that dance, right? Like the dancing can allow them to get closer and to become dance partners and pick up something else, right? So that's that. I think that music is an invitation and also a very strong prodding, right? And a very, very strong encouragement for sharing space, sharing for creating conversations that otherwise, will be much more difficult.
Do you think in the future historians will study playlist?
Definitely. Yes. No, we in the future we historians study playlists because playlist is also an art form. Uh, yeah, both in the of how there's a curation to the playlist, and I know we use curation a lot. Like in sometimes we overuse it, but the curation is the organization, right? The organization, the selecting of of the songs that we want and the mood or the statements that we want to share with the world. And so if we think of playlists in the kind of like even before the streaming era, we can think of also set lists from bands, right? Like and that's intentional. If a band is playing live, that's a set list, right? And they want to create a mood. They want to create a even scenes in their shows. And when you're a music fan, sometimes you don't even think about it. And I had the chance after working with musicians to say, so how do you create your set list, right? And it was for them to create drama, to create um and to create high points, and then like kind of like intimate points, and then big stadium points. So that's one. And then when artists record, it's not random where they place the songs. They want to create a narrative, a sonic narrative in their records. Um, at first it was on an album, right? So they had two sides, and each side they wanted and needed to have a narrative, both technologically, because the way vinyl it's created, you have to have like the longer songs at the beginning and shorter at the end. And then when CD came about, it was like it had to be linear from 1 to 15 because bands just to put 15 songs. And now with playlists, it is to kind of create the most, in a lot of ways, kind of very impactful because you want those songs to grab you at first and then keep you in that playlist, right? But then the playlists have a concept, and be it, like the playlists that you get from the streaming services, but also the ones that we create. We're sharing stories, or we're sharing, in our ways, or we're sharing a narrative of, and that's where, there's songs that might not say something lyrically, but in terms of the mood, they say a lot, right? I cannot think of songs right now at the moment, but there's a lot of songs that might have very little lyrics, but then they evoke a lot. And I think that when you have those in those playlists, playlists allows us to kind of like like people are sharing moods in those, even if like they're just kind of putting. Like there's an organization on playlists that I think that we want to think about more.
Why do we remember lyrics forever?
We remember lyrics because they're very impactful and they relate to our existence, be it past or present. Like they connect to us in that way.
And why does sad music help?
Sad music allows us to let our feelings of sadness flow because in our society, sometimes we're not given that space.
In your opinion, is there bad music?
In my opinion, there's no bad music, just music that I don't like.
Personal question for Jorge. When Jorge is showering, what's the music, his playlist look like in the shower?
Because I shower in the morning, I like to listen to upbeat music. I listen to a lot of indie, but indie kind of like it's upbeat. I try to listen to stuff that I haven't heard. And why? Because I cannot push the forward button. That pushes me to listen to new music.
You drive to work. What's your first song comes to mind?
I listen to a Rafael song, which is El Trabajo. And it's like, but it's kind of like also a beat, like, yeah. And I have a playlist that is like the hype one, because I want to get, like if I'm driving, like I want to feel in, like in a kind of hype up mood as opposed to kind of like slow mood. Mm-hmm.
Does Jorge have any sad songs he likes to listen?
Yes, I do. I do. And I think that it's not until later in life that like I felt allowed to listen to understand and to feel the many different feelings, right? And I think that coming as a Latino man, sadness is sometimes not, it's discouraged, right? Or in public. And I think that music allows me to in the past, even the present, like allows me to be able to feel sad and let it flow.
What advice you would give to someone that is not feeling well, going through a lot of things in life? What would be your advice to them in regards to music?
I think that in regards to music, music is our soundtrack, and to select songs that rather than sometimes select songs that accompany them on their journey. And in this is not like, oh yeah, just pick like very upbeat stuff, but that those songs allow them to relate to their mood and their feeling. And sometimes as hard as that is, like when people are feeling the weight of troubles and the difficulties of life, I think that songs allow you to to be able to express those feelings, that then you can see that past and present people struggle with something similar. And that there's also the possibility of bouncing back, and or even reflecting on the loss, but that the fact that they're listening to that music, um, it's testament that they're still alive, and that they can, like, put one foot after the other to continue, like they're living on.
Music, it's part of you. Do you express that with your wardrobe?
Yes. For me, the way I dress as a professional professor, those have to do with thinking of, like, it relates. It's a connection to music. I have always like to think that, music gives you many different tones, many different moods, and it's color. Even though we can see music, there's so much color in music. And so when I think of my wardrobe as, like, as a professor, I want to share some of that. Like the tones, the moods, the difference. I mean, the difference in terms of, so it's not like, when we think of a professor, we might think of an old guy, with like a coat and a suit and monochrome. And for me, I like to use bright colors, or, like, distinct patterns, because I think that that's a continuation of not only how music might look like, but also think of, like, performers. Performers create their own unique wardrobes. I don't, but I like to at least, like, wear wardrobe that is distinct, and it gives some individuality.
Most memorable concert, and how were you dressed?
Phew, how much time do you have? No, I would say the most memorable concert. Gosh, that's hard. Sorry. Um, Most memorable concert would be Porter. It's a band from Guadalajara, and it was in Mexicali, and it was just like there was like a snow. There was a dust storm, because it's a desert, and I thought that it was not gonna happen that way. So I was wearing I was not wearing a jacket, and I should have, you know. But that's, like, sometimes when I go to shows, I'm more on the comfortable side. So
Do you feel sometimes that music transforms you to a different person, a different time frame, and you enjoy that because you can become someone that you probably would not be in the present day?
yes, music does help me and helps us become somebody different. For me, as an introvert, music allowed me to be much more social, and give me a purpose. Because as a introvert person, yes, I wanted to be just a music fan, listen to the music, but then also push me to then wanting to do shows, wanting to put together shows. And so that allowed me to become a different person, not the introvert, nerdy person that was, I always seen, like, reading books, but also put that into practice of, like, what would it be like to put together a show the way I have read about, people doing shows in punk rock venues, or like the rock and roll impresarios of the 1970s in San Francisco. So even though I was this dorky, like, nerdy introvert person, putting a show allowed me to be a different person. And so that I think, music, that's kind of like being a protagonist, right? But music also allows you to feel, to embody, to create a character. And if you're listening to that song, you might be that character for those 3-4 minutes.
Favorite movie with the best score or playlist?
Oof, I'm not ready for that one. So, favorite movie with the best score. Gosh, the one that I resonate with is La Bamba. I mean, in that was the first one that, like, for me was, still as a living in Mexico. I saw this movie with people that looked like me. They were Mexican Americans, like my family that lived in LA, and I was just like, wow, they resonated with me. And it was a movie in English. I mean, like, the dialogues in English, but then it had songs in Spanish. So that's one that would resonate. But there's so many. But that's a early one that made an impact on me.
For someone that loves music, I can only imagine you're a very romantic person. What's that one song, love song, that you love to play?
Gosh. I would say something by Rafael. I mean, he is always very. Um, it, it's always very, like passionate. The way he listened to it. And when I was a kid, I didn't know what love was, but that felt like love. Like that felt like love. And so, but also Café Tacuba. I think that Eres, it's such a song that, yes, that I think about my partner when I think about, that song. So, um, I mean, there's so many, right? But that's the thing, when you love somebody, like every song becomes their song. I mean, like you listen to it, like, and you think about them. Um, you're like, I can dedicate it to her. I can dedicate this to them, right?
I'm gonna name artists, top of my head, and then just give me one word, what it represents to you. Sol de Stereo,
Groundbreaking,
La Ley,
interesting,
Enanitus Verde,
pioneers,
Juan Gabriel,
transgressive,
Selena,
sad, yeah,
and lastly,
sadness. Selena's sadness.
because of what happened.
Yes,
And lastly, Bad Bunny.
unlimited. I mean, you wanted one word, right? So unlimited.
Unlimited.
Hello, you're watching Rough Cut Diaries, and I had a really great time. And I would like to invite you to our exhibit, A Great Day in East LA, Celebrando the Eastside Sound, an exhibit here at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes in downtown Los Angeles. It is open, it's on view now, all the way to August 2026. And please get in touch with me if you have flyers, archives of different music scenes of Los Angeles. From the 1980s to the present, and you would like to share them and preserve them. I'm open, and I would like to learn about your collections and see how we can preserve them.
Are you taking any donations so you can expand, so you can preserve everything you've collected throughout the years?
Yes, I mean, definitely open to that. Right now, I do it in kind of like in institutional ways, but definitely it's the support is always helpful, because ultimately all these personal collections of music material is our collective history as Angelinos, as Latinos, not only in Southern California, but in the U.S. And I think we should all think about that to preserve our history.